Good evening. I'd like to call the business meeting of the Portland Board of Public Education to order. It is Tuesday, March 17th, and the board is meeting at Casco Bay High School in the Great Space. This meeting is closed to the public as part of our precautions for related to COVID-19. The meeting can be accessed through, or rather live, through TV 1302. You can access the live broadcast on the PPS website and on TV 1302 page. The link to the live broadcast is also posted on the Portland Public Schools Facebook page and on Twitter. And this meeting will be recorded and later posted on the PPS YouTube website. May I please ask the superintendent to call the roll?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Mr. Atkinson, Mr. Balfants.
Here.
Ms. Bondo.
Présente.
Mr. Burke.
Here.
Ms. Figdor.
Here.
Ms. Morioni. Ms. Thompson. Ms. Trevaro. And all of the students are excused, and then Chair Rodriguez.
Presente. And I did hear from Ms. Morioni, Ms. Thompson, Mr. Atkinson, and Ms. Trevaro, excuse me, who did gave me a heads up that they would not be joining us tonight. Would everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. For the remarks of the chair, I just have a few quick words I want to put out there. Needless to say, the last couple of weeks have certainly been challenging for the district, and especially so this past weekend and today have been very difficult for Portland Public Schools teachers, administrators, and of course our students and their families. I'm proud to recognize how proud I am of the way the superintendent and his team have risen to this challenge. The board is immensely proud of the work we've all done under such a difficult circumstance. We salute you, and certainly we have challenges ahead. Please know that this board is here to support you in this work. Superintendent, for your report, you have the floor.
I'm going to skip my report and then just introduce the business item when we get there as part of the board focus.
Appreciate that. We are going to approve the minutes of the last couple of meetings just to get that out of the way, and then we'll move on to our presentation. So consideration and action to approve the minutes of the meeting of March 3rd, 2020. Is there a motion? Mr. Berg, second by Mr. Balfants. Are there any questions on the motion? Seeing none, and we don't have any public in here, so we won't have public comment. Any board discussions on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes of the meeting of March 3rd, 2020, please indicate. And that's unanimous. Next, consideration and action to approve the minutes of the meeting of March 10th, 2020. Is there a motion? Ms. Victor, second by Mr. Burke. Any questions on the motion? Seeing none, there is no public present, so any board discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes of the meeting of March 10th, 2020, please indicate. And that's unanimous. Next, now we're up to our item, Board Focus on Educational Issues, a district plan for the continuity of education during the COVID-19 related closure. Superintendent, you want to set us up?
Sure. As you well noted, these are exceptional circumstances under which we gathered today. As you can see, we've taken measures to limit the size of this gathering. The meeting is closed to the public. We've placed everyone at least 6 feet away from each other, and we have limited number of staff here. We've limited the number of staff here to those who are essential to the topics on the agenda and are broadcasting, and everyone else is either watching at home or connected virtually, as you saw earlier, for Q&A via Zoom. I want to begin by expressing my gratitude to the members of my crisis team that have been working tirelessly to coordinate our response. My cabinet, Malia Nally and Aaron Townsend, Grace Valenzuela, Mustafa Rastampur, Miranda Fasulo, and Barb Stoddard have been joined by our communications coordinator, Tess Nazalevich, our head nurse, Tina Valu, and Molly Myers. This team has met daily since last week, including all weekend, and have been relentless in following through and coordinating out from our small team to the district as a whole. The district's overall response has been tremendous. Our principals, our department heads, our union leaders have all helped to shape and communicate our responses in too many ways for me to name. I'm humbled to lead this amazing group of committed educators. We've had tremendous support from our partners across the city and region, city leaders, neighboring superintendents, state leaders, community-based organizations, and partners have all helped us to think through options and rallied resources to help us in 1 week close schools and transition to remote learning. I take responsibility for any mistakes we've made along the way, but I can tell you that they would have been more numerous if not for the thoughtful feedback and suggestions from all of these people and organizations. We'll be talking about some of those efforts and partnerships as we go through our agenda tonight. I've appreciated the support and partnership of the board. You've been generous with your ideas and supportive of our collective decisions. You've been outstanding communicators to me, to staff, and to community stakeholders. I've always said that Portland is unique in its level of social engagement and commitment, and this past week has reminded me of that time and time again. I want to talk a little bit about what we're going to do tonight. Under guidance from the Maine Department of Education, we're required to develop a plan for continuity of instruction during a school closure. Approval of the plan is what we are here to do, so that's your action item for tonight. So tonight we'll be providing you a detailed explanation of what our continuity of instruction plan is, and I can tell you that I'm incredibly proud of what we are presenting. It was a week ago yesterday that our team convened virtually for the first time to begin to develop this plan under Malia Nally's leadership. Since then, leveraging best practices from all over the country and the passion and ingenuity of our great staff, this plan is ready for your approval. I want to be clear, as you will see tonight, that this plan is not static. It will continue to evolve. We're approaching this work with an understanding that we're learning as we go, that the hurdles that we face are sometimes quite significant, pervasive, and grounded in the existing inequities in our society, our city, and our schools. We're approaching this work with a commitment to listening, adapting, and troubleshooting when we find that something isn't working. And we're approaching this work with an eye for how what we are doing now can be grown, adapted, and used in the future to improve how we respond to crises and to everyday learning in our community. For example, we recognize that not all families have tech devices and/or internet access to be able to access remote learning. In order to provide equitable educational access to all students, we will provide devices to students who need them. At this time, we have a growing understanding of who among our students needs technology devices, and we're working to develop plans for distribution. We're still working on access to hotspots for internet access. At this time, we're recommending to families who need internet access that they avail themselves of the free broadband and Wi-Fi access offered by Spectrum. Information about that has been posted on our website and on social media, and if students or parents and guardians have questions or need tech support, they can call our help desk number at 207-874-8159, or they can also send us an email at our PPS helpline at portlandschools.org. Bottom line, while we're asking for your approval of this plan, we also want you to understand that we're committed to making improvements in it in real time and over time. In addition to discussing the continuity of instruction plan, we are also discussing what we're doing in what we call our continuity of care. How do we ensure that we provide services such as meals and crisis support for our families? One of the critical aspects of your approval is that it opens the door to allow us to maintain continuity of compensation and benefits for our employees. Our ability to ensure that the days when our students are engaged in meaningful remote learning count for school year purposes is important in and of itself, but it is also critical to our ability to pay our hourly staff their regular wages. If these days were needed to be made up at the end of the school year, much in the same way that we do regularly with snow days, we would not be able to pay our hourly school year employees as they would need to work and, of course, be paid during those days when we made them up at the end of the year. So as part of our agenda tonight, we want to make visible to you and to the community the steps that we've taken to work with our staff to ensure that this school closure does not negatively impact our staff's ability to pay their bills and take care of their families. Finally, we will briefly touch on the financial implications of the closure, again, in the spirit of informing you and making this visible to our community stakeholders. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Assistant Superintendent Malia Nally to walk us through our continuity of instruction plan.
Are you about to
I'm going to present it.
And you just presented, right, because we just made some edits, so
Okay.
just jump out and refresh. Thank you.
All right.
As the superintendent is getting the PowerPoint up on the screen, I just wanted board members to know that in board docs, you have a few documents that give you much more details. So the slides that I'm going to step you through follow the logic and flow of the document in board docs titled Portland Public Schools Remote Learning Expectations During a School Closure. So you can kind of track with that if you want to see some of the additional detail that's included in the document itself. So you can push it forward, please.
So just quickly, do you want to do the objectives? You want me to do the objectives?
I think you kind of did them, but redo them.
That's right. Yeah, I did them.
Yeah, okay. All right, so we start with just making sure everyone understands what we mean by remote learning. So remote learning in our context is when students continue their learning from home with support from teachers. And where we have an expectation that students will complete assignments and assessments provided, supported by technology, and in the case that students are completing printed materials, work packets, if you will, that those will eventually be turned in when schools resume. So that's our kind of basic working definition of remote learning. In terms of some of the planning and resources that we put into preparing for tomorrow, as you all know, Monday and Tuesday of this week, we had as non-student days so that we would give our staff time to plan and prepare for remote learning, which starts tomorrow. The superintendent mentioned our awareness of the fact that our families have varied access to technology, and so we've sent out a survey to families to diagnose their needs in terms of devices at the elementary and 6th grade level, and then internet access. We've launched a training plan for staff on virtual communication, so there's 4 platforms that we currently are intending to lean on most heavily: Google Classroom, Zoom, Google Chat, and Talking Points. And so our IT team, in collaboration with our building technology coordinators, have developed trainings and pushed out a schedule so that teachers can join as it works for them. I think one of our first trainings had over 70 people in it yesterday, so there's been a huge uptake on that in terms of staff jumping in and making sure that they're aware of how to use the tools that we're going to be making accessible. We do have some guidance for teachers on best practices in a remote learning environment, and that will definitely continue to evolve. There's been some cool collaboration that's happening already. I got a text from our middle school math teachers, and they had their Zoom call, and they were all collaborating and doing funny things, but getting work done. So, and then finally, this evening, in our communication out to staff, we will be sharing our remote learning Google Drive. So one of the documents that I believe is in board docs as well is just the table of contents to the drive. And so in this drive, we have all of our communications separated by internal and external, the core documents like the learning plan, attendance plan, etc. And then we have a folder for all content areas where we're putting central resources for teachers for planning, and then a folder for teachers to share across schools as well. So a bunch of infrastructure is set in place so that we can be pushing out common information and promoting collaboration and sharing of materials across schools. In terms of elementary, some of the highlights from the learning plan include, first, just reminder that pre-K will be suspended during remote learning. However, our pre-K teachers have worked the first 2 days of this week to put together activity bags and packets for students that are age appropriate, with, of course, the intent to make sure that all of our students, regardless of the resources they have at home, will have access to developmentally appropriate activities to use while they're at home. So those will be part of what gets distributed tomorrow in our staggered distribution process. As far as K through 5, last week, actually, our literacy and math coaches got together along with EL teacher leaders and developed common grade span lessons that are shared across buildings. So they work together on the first grade plans, second grade plans, et cetera. So that was in collaboration with our director of curriculum and instruction. And I think they put some awesome work together, and we produced those packets for schools and had them delivered this week. So students will be using that type of lesson. We are asking families who have the ability to download or print materials on their own to do that in an effort to limit the number of families who need to come on the staggered schedule to pick things up from the school. And our rationale for having packets in the first week is, again, an acknowledgement that not everybody has access to technology, and so we wanted an equitable experience and didn't want some students to have tech-enabled supports and others not. So that's why we have the packets for elementary for the first 3 days. In general, our expectation is that there's daily lessons of 30 to 40 minutes in the core content areas, and that STEM and social studies will be integrated into reading and writing, actually. The rationale for that's a little bit shorter than a typical period, and just based on what we've been learning about best practice in remote learning, usually things take longer when students are independent, and so that was the rationale for the guidance. Things might be slightly different than that at times, but we wanted to provide some clarity for our teachers and consistency across our schools. Our specials, so art, PE, music, etc., those teachers are continuing to plan activities that could be done at home, being mindful of not requiring special materials for them, and those lessons will go out each week as per the typical schedule for the students. So if it's the 5th grade and you do art on Thursday, there'll be some sort of art activity that will be included in the lesson plans for Thursday. SEL lessons, social-emotional learning, are going to be a part of what gets pushed out as well, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later in the presentation. In terms of secondary, this is structured a little bit differently just because of the developmental stage of the students. So again, a lot of the teachers have been using Google Classroom, and so for many students, they have their device, they have internet access, and they'll be able to get their first 3 days of lessons that way. But in the case that a student doesn't have internet access, we will be printing those lessons and materials for students for that staggered pickup at the building. And then starting on March 23rd, secondary classes will all be organized through Google Classroom as the hub of how we communicate with students. The assignments and materials will be consistent with the student schedule, and I think you all know that some of the schedules, like at our high school, are different depending on the high school, so the schedule will match what is typical for the student. There's going to be some synchronous and also definitely asynchronous learning taking place. We're, again, mindful of the fact that a lot of students will need to do asynchronous learning. They might have siblings at home that they're taking care of. We've put a note out to buildings to make sure they're thinking about the food pickup between 10 a.m. and noon, that we should expect many students will be out picking up food during that time. So a lot of asynchronous learning will take place, but there are some teachers in buildings that want to do some synchronous opportunities, meaning that the class gets together on something like Zoom, and that's to continue to create a sense of community in addition to thinking about how to best deliver the content. And in the case that we do synchronous learning through Zoom or Google, we'll be taping those so that they'll be accessible to students later in the case that they missed it for some understandable reason. And then finally, both Portland Adult Ed and PATHS are working on remote learning plans unique to their context as well. In terms of attendance, and just for board members, wanted to call your attention to the fact that another one of the attachments in board docs is titled Remote Learning Student Attendance Plan. So you guys can look at that there. But we're determining student attendance based on participation in remote learning. There are a variety of strategies that teachers will use to monitor participation that will depend on the grade level and sometimes depend on the lesson or what's happening within a given week. We provide teachers in our plan with a set of options to consider. Elementary will be doing daily attendance check, and then secondary has an expectation of a minimum of every other day. And so a little bit of differentiation there, again, mindful of the difference in the schedules. And then finally, I think the big thing to understand is that we've established new attendance codes, and those are in our system, IC. And so rather than just using the binary present or not, we have 3 categories that people will track. The first is that the student is present and participating. The second is that they have inconsistent attendance or participation. And the third is not present or inactive. In our guidance to teachers, as you can see in the document, we give an approximate percentage of time as a way to calibrate across classrooms and schools. The first 2 categories will ultimately be reported to the state as present, and the third as not, as an absence. But we are interested in being able to disaggregate the data. So, for example, of the students who are counted present, we'll of course be looking at monitoring the data at the percentage of those who are present but inconsistent in terms of how fully engaged they are in the remote learning experience. In terms of communication and technology, as a general rule, we're encouraging over-communication just to maintain connection with students and families. We have put out guidance to teachers to use precise, easy-to-understand language, being mindful of students who don't speak English as a first language and/or their families. And we're partnering with the multilingual team for language supports. One of the things that's happening is we have language acquisition ed techs and then people at Portland Adult Ed who speak many different languages. So we're actually going to be kind of rallying everyone who speaks the languages of our students and families to be able to increase the capacity of our multilingual team to support translation out to students and families. We're also expanding the use of Talking Points app. And this is an app, actually, can you speak a little bit, do you know it better, Superintendent? Do you know much more about the, and
I don't, I really don't.
okay, well, later on, Mr. Carlos is on our Zoom, and he can
Mustafa's
answer,
also on.
and Mustafa, they could answer more specific questions if you're interested, but it's basically an app that does translation. So it's a tool that teachers can use if they're trying to communicate with students and families in other languages. And then we'll be giving access to the language line as an additional resource for people to use. And we've already, I think, spoken to the fact that we're making sure that everybody will have access to technology. In terms of support for English learners, I had mentioned this earlier, but just want to kind of underscore the fact that the first day packets were developed in collaboration with EL teachers, and that the expectation is that EL teachers will continue to support the implementation of the individual language plans during this time, that they'll be collaborating with classroom teachers to ensure that the remote learning plans are accessible to the English learners in the classroom. And then they will also continue to work on developing language instruction plans For example, online resources, videos, et cetera, that are appropriate for the language levels. So thinking specifically about students who are IELD levels 1 and 2 according to the Access Assessment. In terms of special education, several things. So first, our special educators are developing the learning materials and collaborating with classroom teachers to make sure that lessons have accommodations and modifications within the remote learning context. I do want to name that we will use the allowable flexibility for up to 10 school days to further flesh out plans for how to serve students in accordance with their IEP, especially when doing so is more complex or nuanced than just adding in accommodations to a lesson. So some students have highly individualized plans with one-to-one staff that supports them, and so in those cases, we are still trying to figure out what does that actually look like in a remote learning context. We actually just got guidance from Drummond moments before we got here, trying to help explain this to special ed departments across the state. There hasn't been concrete guidance on that yet coming from the state, so we're all in the same boat there and trying to learn from each other. It may result in additional extended school year, ESY we call it, in special education, and or compensatory services, depending on what we are not able to fulfill in the IEP for students that have those highly individualized needs. The district programs have been working together, so these are programs like Beach or Bridge or Breathe, and they're working on that same kind of protocol of learning materials and packets for the first 3 days and then moving more online. They've been communicating with their families directly about what they're planning, and then in each case there's some differentiated plans and tools available for parents. So I use the Breathe example up here where in addition to the lesson plans, they're providing behavior tracking tools like they use in school for families to potentially use. And we're in the midst of figuring out how to set up the weekly social work sessions that students receive 1 hour per week in the program. Our specialists, so these are people like occupational therapists, physical therapists, et cetera, are also working on ways to provide activities for students to engage in. They have done a ton of great creative thinking and collection around resources and activities and recommendations for the beginning part of this time. But then if we continue for a while, they're still trying to figure out what does that look like in terms of how they provide the service and work with students, especially when there's one-on-one supports. And then finally, we have some students that are in special purpose programs, so these are in other schools, not in our district. And our special purpose programs have been making different types of decisions about school closure, and some of them are still open. And so our students are not, our guidance has been that our students do not attend. And I mentioned before we have that flexible period of 10 days, and so we're kind of awaiting further legal guidance here and to see what these special purpose programs do, but just wanted to make sure you all are aware of that as well.
I'm sorry, and what I'm gathering is that you want to wait till the end for questions, and the only reason I'm interrupting is just because there's just so much, and I want to make sure that.
Maybe we can pause at the end of the
learning
next
plan.
slide is the last of
Okay.
the learning plan slides. So before we go into the other continuity of care and other things, we'll stop there.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. And then social emotional learning, I referenced this a little bit before in the elementary planning, but we will also support providing social emotional learning lessons that continue. Our elementary schools all use second step curriculum, and it has an online resource for families, and so we'll be pushing out supports and guidance around how to access that once we have the technology out there to all families. And then our school counselors and social workers will continue to stay in touch with families. They've written a letter with a ton of resources and guidance and ideas for how that's going to look. And so there are plans in place for how we can ensure that there's still connectivity with our social work team during a remote learning period. So I think that's the last slide, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so I know,
don't
yes,
need
that was a lot of information, and the documents and the board docs have a little bit more as well, so definitely open to questions. And just, you heard before, but our Director of Curriculum Instruction, Jesse Robinson, is on Zoom, Carlos Gomez, Language, Deb Mullis from Special Education, as well as Christy from the Breathe program, looking at all you all. And then Mustafa and Aaron as well, in case you have questions for them.
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, I once again just want to acknowledge just the immense amount of work that you guys have been accomplishing in crisis mode. And I'm speechless. But I definitely want to ask board members if they have questions to please bring them out. Anything that you want to have clarified or not.
And I think Malia referenced an appendix or a list of resources. I don't think that we got that into the into board docs.
The table of contents?
Table of contents.
Okay, we can follow up with that one.
Ms. Victor?
Yeah, just echoing, this is incredible work that was done, I know, in an extremely abbreviated time. So thank you for moving mountains for our students and families in this kind of uncharted moment. I had just at first a extremely basic question, which is today and yesterday, are we able to count them as educational days, or will they essentially be added to the calendar at the end of the year, assuming that?
Right. Today and yesterday are not educational days, so you might think of them like snow days. In terms of adding them to the end of the year, I believe that's still an open question in terms of what the state will do and providing any waivers on that. And so we're waiting on the state for guidance, but technically they were not remote learning days.
It will require requesting a waiver, which we will do for that.
Okay. And is your expectation that that we will get a waiver for them?
They've said that they will have tons of flexibility, and it's, again, our staff were incredibly engaged during this time. We needed that time to be able to get ready.
Absolutely. I'm just trying to figure out if we have to add those days in, and
If we have to
don't
add
have to
those
budget
days in,
for
it's
it.
a budget problem, so
That was my-
that's why I don't expect that would
Okay,
be the case.
terrific. And then, how many students are in the special purpose program?
Deb, can you answer that? Somebody needs to unmute her. Aaron, we can't hear you either.
Yeah, before you go any further, we can't hear you.
We are actually pretty good at this.
Getting better.
Why don't we move on to another question, and then we can come back to that.
Aaron, can you unmute Deb?
She was unmuted to something on microphone. I don't know.
Could I ask another question in the meantime?
Yes.
So I understand that, many of our classrooms use Google Classroom, have been using Google Classroom. Where we haven't been using Google Classroom, for instance, in the elementary schools, that will be a first step will be to get that Google Classroom up for next week in terms of delivering.
Yeah, yes, and so we set the expectation that all secondary teachers would be using Google Classroom. We didn't say that as explicitly at the elementary level. There's Seesaw and other programs that might be more familiar and developmentally appropriate. But like I mentioned, we are doing that tech training all week, and that will happen ongoing, and those will be recorded and accessible for teachers. With an understanding that we don't think all teachers have the same skills and comfort using those kinds of platforms. So elementary is not necessarily 100% Google Classroom. Secondary will be, but elementary will use a variety of tools. And we're still kind of landing if there's going to be something fully consistent there.
But there would be some centralized portal for a given
Yeah.
classroom to connect and get their assignments and.
Yes. Yes.
Great, thank you.
Let me throw one question in that I'm getting from Ms. Morioni. I think it's from Ms. Morioni. So I guess, how do we account for the differences in parent availability to support students with the use of technology and engagement in the academic work?
I'll say a couple things about that, and you can add on to that. I mean, we are planning, so we're going to have food distribution sites, and we've talked about the IT team having some folks either there and or through phone to be supports to families that need additional IT support to leverage the technology. But I will also say that I think something that weighs very heavily on us is the fact that different families are frankly going to be set up differently to manage the situation and to make it as fruitful as possible for students. And so we are very aware of that and take that very seriously. It's something that keeps me up at night. And so I think we'll have to think really carefully about monitoring how students do. And in our plan, we actually speak to the fact, or maybe this was the letter we wrote today to staff, that the opportunity gap will be potentially widened in this scenario, and that we're going to need to be really thoughtful and intentional about what do we do to support students with interventions and additional time and support once we're able, if the gap widens as a result. I don't know if you want to say anything else on that.
I mean, the only thing I will say, and this is sort of more broadly to the community, is, in our guidance to our own staff, we recognize that, there are people that are working as teachers at the same time as they're being asked by their children's teachers to support them in their learning. And so we recognize that the schedule is not going to be the same schedule as it would be if, they didn't have those work commitments. So I guess to all employers, asking them to show that same level of flexibility and understanding that their families, that their workers are also supporting their children at home. And, this is obviously a time of new learning for all of us in terms of how we communicate, how we support kids' learning. And so, we're going to have, everybody rallying together to be able to make this work. But there's no question that if you have a job that takes you out of the house and, you're not going to be there for your child to be learning from, 9 to 3, and, you're going to have to work with your child during the, when you come back from your own work, if you don't have another arrangement.
Yeah, and I think most of us probably acknowledge that, and, it's like Malia said, we expect the gaps to continue to widen in this scenario. I guess before, I think there was another question. I want to.
And I think Deb answered that question.
I have the answer here, actually. Thank you, Deb. Another means of technology, texting. Okay. So she said we currently have 41 students in special purpose private schools, including some students in out-of-state residential programs who aren't affected for the most part, of course, by school closures. Well, not of course, actually. We have 2 schools who have chosen to stay open, affecting 6 of our students participating.
Ms. Bondo, you had a question?
Yeah. Thank you. This is amazing. For a few days where we have a bird, and we know that we have to experience that it's not going to be easy as outcomes for some other vulnerable students. So I have a question for the elementary take-home bags. Mm-hmm. And are the way it's going to happen? I mean, each classroom we have each taking away bags for each student, and parents need to go and pick it up, or as the strategy around
Yeah.
the take-home bags, how to reach out those parents, because we need to make sure that each student from those classrooms must have those bags.
Yeah. So the communication that's gone out, and that we'll keep reinforcing, and hopefully people who are listening are hearing this here too, is that, well, first, we were originally going to have all families come in to pick up the packets, but as things have progressed in the state, and our depth of understanding around the importance of social distancing has increased, we shifted the expectation slightly, and so teachers and schools will be sharing the materials, through the teacher on the website, and asking any family who is able to download the materials themselves do so, rather than to come in for the printed version. In the case that you don't have the capacity to download the materials and or don't have learning supplies at home, then we're going to have the packets at the site. We made a decision to do generic grade level packets in an effort to not require as much logistical coordination and touch points in the drop-off. So Ann Hanna, for example, principal at Talbot, emailed me a picture of how they have their bins already, so did Lyseth. So they're going to have it set up, first grade's here, second grade out in tables. Some of our schools will be doing that as a drive-through, and some of our schools will have it in like the largest open area with windows open. And in addition to the packets, in some schools will have the like learning bags of supplies, markers, things like that, that some families might not have at home. And so those will be available for people to pick up as they need them as well. I think there's something else I wanted to say about that, but
I think the special ed piece of
Yeah.
that, so those special bags that are individualized for a student.
yeah, in the case of a district program or special education, there might be a student-specific packet, and so those would be put out most likely in an envelope in a bin based on the letter of the last name. Oh, this is what I was going to say. And so our staff isn't going to be picking it up and handing it to people. People will just come and grab it from their own stack. We encourage people to wear gloves. We'll have, hand sanitizer available. And then we put the communication out that families should come based on their last name.
Yeah.
And so, you would be coming between 9 and 11 to pick up anything you would need for your child. So again, the effort here is to stagger who's there and not have any kind of crowds congregating in the process.
Okay. And just a sub-question is that we know that a lot of parents among the new Mainers, they may have some phone numbers, not working anymore. So the communication piece to make sure that those parents are there to pick up those bags. The multilingual office can work, because I've been receiving a lot of robocall, and I know by experience, there are a lot of parents. We could not reach them.
Yeah.
Through robocall. So are we already prepared to reach out those parents to make sure that they can come on those place to pick up their bags? Just some logistic, some
Yeah.
other plan strategic on that.
Yes, absolutely, and we are following up with them, with our multilingual staff, and they're very actively calling. So we sent the survey out yesterday around technology needs. They followed up with their list of parents that they normally follow up with, so they are very much doing that.
Okay. Last question is on the participation, on the attendance for the elementary, the K-5, the daily. So how is going to happen? How the attendance will be taking place? Daily attendance, how is going to happen?
Yep. So on the attendance plan, which is linked in there, you can see that there are a handful of options for how students can show that they're present and participating. So for the benefit of the public that's not accessing board docs right now, some examples are they show up and join a virtual class on Google Hangout or Zoom. They replied to an update or discussion board around an assignment. They submitted an assignment. They have a phone call check-in or the use of the talking points, which is the program where we can reach out and have it translated. So there's a variety of checkpoints, but that largely center around checking in on students completing the work that's provided for that day.
Yeah, and the point that I'm talking is about those families. Because now I think what we have to do, the parents will become the teachers. I mean, helping those students to go over that. And some of the parents, they cannot use the technology, even though we're providing laptops and some other material. So that means to navigate all the area of internet and online system is not easy for everybody. So we need to make sure then, the attendance, the daily attendance that I'm talking about is at those parents, how those parents can make sure then they can get the attendance to the teachers. I just want to
So
see. I don't know
again,
if
I
you get
mean,
me.
there's no question that there are challenges. I mean, I think I prefaced this whole thing by saying that, one, we know that there are challenges that are rooted in, existing inequities in society, and, that those are particularly around the areas of technology in this particular setting, but they're also around flexibility in in jobs and things along those lines. We do have, one of the options that Malia mentioned is a phone check-in with the student and the teacher. And so that's something that's, existing technology that everybody has. And, if the student isn't completing assignments, if the student isn't turning in assignments, if the student isn't checking in on Google Classroom and commenting on somebody else's journal or something along those lines, there is always the option for our staff to contact those families directly. And, we do have, as I mentioned in my comments, that, that we are prepared to help families to be able to not only gain access, but also be able to utilize what they gain access to. So that is part of our commitment from our IT team and our MLC team, is to help families to figure out how to do this. Clearly, a much, more intensive set of supports than what we would do for myself or for, you or for, Mr. Burke. But, we're prepared to do that and understand that it's going to be a tall order and that it's going to require, much more work. And in the end, it's probably not going to be as universally successful as it will be for other students.
Yeah, thank you.
Can I just add one point to that? That, I think part of what we're going to have in the attendance is that differentiation of 3 levels so that we can institute what we call RTI, response to intervention protocols, for students that we see aren't engaged. And maybe it's just that they don't know how to check in, or maybe it's that they're actually not engaged. And then we also have social workers, counselors, and ed techs too, who could be doing some check-ins. So we're trying to figure out, for people who are in support positions, what's the appropriate role for them to play, and supporting that kind of more direct touch or reach out to students who would need it. So that's part of the plan too, is that teachers and administrators will direct other staff who aren't managing a classroom in the same way in support of students who need help to be able to access this type of learning experience.
Thank you.
I guess a good time, and I wanted to, and I meant to say it in my opening remarks, to just recognize the work that multilingual, multicultural staff have been doing, not just in this work, but in all the communication that the district has been putting out, in translating that, and of course, in reaching out to parents. I know for a fact that they're almost 24/7 reaching out through text messages, through phone calls with families, and that this staff and these families have, strong relationships. So I know that they're working tirelessly to communicate with those communities, and again, just want to recognize them, that they are also working under crisis circumstances. And it's like Javier and Malia have said, obviously we are going to see a widening of these gaps, and as we move forward and we identify those gaps, I'm sure that they're going to work, again, tirelessly to bridge them as best as possible. And, I've heard from so many community members, organizations that have reached out trying to help or to offer their help. So I have strong faith that our community will help us out as well. And I think it's important that we acknowledge that these families are under unique challenges, and that they already have been for a long time. So thank you for directing your questions at those concerns. Can I ask one question about the distribution? I also did get, so my daughter's a student at middle school, so I've already seen some of the communication that administrators have sent out, and at least in my house, we've been able to really navigate those really well, and they've been really responsive, so I want to acknowledge that as well. For families that don't have cars, that cannot go to distribution points, again, my understanding is that through volunteers and through staff that have other duties, that they'll be able to do some of the distribution as well.
Yeah, so we are planning to diagnose where we're at after tomorrow. We have some concerns about asking staff to go out to homes for all of the obvious reasons. And so there's a whole slew of ideas that people have brainstormed around the use of school buses and all sorts of things. So we're trying to kind of take stock. Tomorrow afternoon, we have another meeting where we'll convene together to look at what happened, what we understand about getting things out, and that will help us understand which solution of the many that have been brainstormed is best suited for the scale of the need in terms of people who aren't able to access the distribution sites and also can't get it online at home.
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate that. Do we have any other questions? Mr. Burke?
I just want to say thanks for a really tough few days. I haven't seen either of you in person to just acknowledge what must have been an excruciating decision to even close the schools in light of all these inequities and things that we're talking about now. I can only imagine how that weighed on your heart and your mind as you made that. So thank you for holding that for all of us, for all the families and all of Portland, and making the tough call that was bound to happen. But nonetheless, making that call was not easy. I'm not going to try to be generous with my ideas. I just have one question, and you can direct me to if it comes next. But one group that I haven't seen discussed so far is our homeless students, and just curious about plans for them.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Are you going to talk or? Okay.
Yeah. Well, I know that in my 250 plus emails, there is one from our homeless coordinator. So I know that we don't have and it's an equity email. So it is definitely on the radar, and we will get to it. And, obviously our homeless families have access to the that distribution sites and the packet distribution at those sites. We know that as of this morning, there is internet access at the shelter, but clearly there are additional challenges for our homeless families, and we look forward to trying to again get under the hood for some of those other areas. I don't know if anybody. Do you have anything or anybody on the Zoom call?
I would just say that, I think Susan, who's our coordinator, has been proactive with identifying a lot of issues and potential solutions. And so I do think, one, the plan is not fleshed out, but I do think there's a lot of good creative thinking. I mean, there's certain things we could do. Again, back to the fact that we can redeploy some staff who aren't managing classroom themselves to offer more directive, kind of stepping a group of students, if they're there in the shelter in some way, through the learning experience. So I think there's a lot of commitment and motivation to figure out if there's unique solutions we can provide there. But that part of the plan is definitely not complete at this point.
I want to, say a couple things. about that, because I think that one is that at this point, we're closed for 2 weeks, and for 2 weeks, you can sort of muddle your way through it. If this goes further, we've started conversations about how do we support some of those students whose parents simply have to work, whether it's people in the medical professions or, people that don't have the flexibility that most of us here have in terms of our work. So we're going to have to figure that out. And there are examples of how that's being done in some of the other countries that have been, shut down for, in some cases, months. And so we will get there. But at this point, our focus obviously has been on, getting organized to be able to do this for the short haul and, also begin to look at what are the things down the road and, recognize that there are things that we're doing today that we would do differently when, right now we've been focusing on how do you keep social distances. And, I think that at some point we will need to figure out how do you actually set up a classroom setting where, we still keep people safe.
Yeah, just want to acknowledge, I know you're doing the best you can every day and trying to get a little bit further ahead each and every day, so thank you. There was something else I wanted to say. Oh, I hope that this deepens an appreciation for, people outside of this room, if you will, for all that the school district, not just Portland, but so many are asked to hold and fix and solve all the time. This is very revealing. Thank you for all you're doing.
Mr. Balfons, and then we'll go back to Ms. Victor and Ms. Bondo.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for all your work. And so as we go into implementation, obviously you're going to be dealing with issues, unforeseen issues, or different things that might pop up. But I would appreciate an update, either through the chair or perhaps included in your board update in the email, just high-level things that you see are popping up. So thank you.
Well, yeah.
Ms. Victor?
I had 2 questions, and I don't know if my second question you're planning to get to, but I'm wondering what, and I realize this has been immediate, the last few days have been kind of the immediate decision and plans to get remote learning up and running. But I'm wondering what is being done in terms of longer-term planning, if we're going to assume that schools could be closed for a much longer period of time. And then, and I think what I've heard so far is that we're getting this all up and running, we'll troubleshoot, but then this model is intended to be able to be carried into the future. So just, that's my first question, if that is in fact how you're thinking about it. And second is I'm wondering about paid sick leave. I think I have a sense of,
We're going to talk about that in the continuity of compensation
Great.
section.
Thank
So
you.
We'll talk about that. And on the first one, I think that you adequately, described the way we're thinking about it. We have been working in, sort of very quick mode to get ourselves operational. And as I mentioned earlier, we will muddle through 10 days and then start refining and, not just refining, but actually, moving to different things than what we currently have as this becomes a more prolonged if and when this becomes a more prolonged closure. Assistant Superintendent Nally talked about the fact that, one of the things that we know is in our sites is how do we provide extended school year opportunities for special education students, but also how do we make up for the opportunities lost for kids who are, not able to access everything that we have on day one. So whether that's our English language learners, whether those are students whose parents are working and can't support them in the same way. Those are the kinds of things that we know are down the road, and as well to Mr. Burke's question about homeless students, to the question about, what do we do for some students that, for whom learning at home is just not a viable option, as we recognize who those students are and try to figure out what it is that we need to put in place to ensure that they're still learning.
I would just add one additional point, which is that one of the things we're excited to think about is how to think creatively about the ways in which we do professional learning and collaboration across teachers. So there's, in many ways, this is catalyzing some really great collaboration across schools and teachers. And we all know that we've talked about collective efficacy and how a culture of collective efficacy has got a greater impact on student learning and achievement than things like home economics and things like that. And so if this were something that's extended, I think there's a lot of people thinking through ways in which we might collaborate differently than usual in service of putting out great content. So for example, we had our math and literacy coaches, like I mentioned last week, come together for the learning packets, but there's a whole host of opportunity there that we could think more deeply about in terms of, we talked about dividing and conquering across schools. LISA takes first and second grade, and they do their videos and, all this sort of stuff. So there's a lot of emerging thinking there that I think could be supported through some new and creative teacher collaboration structures that I would imagine becoming much more robust if we continue along in this kind of a context.
Thank you.
Ms. Bondo?
Yeah, just a clarification, maybe it's on my notes here. So where we start the learning remote is going to be on the 23rd, if understood. That's the distribution. There's going to be on the 23rd.
Tomorrow is distribution.
It's
And
tomorrow.
the first 3 days, so Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday this week are the 3 days where we're saying it has to be non-tech enabled so that there's equitable access. And then Mondays when things might start to move to more technology-based distribution.
Okay, because because we close until the 30th on the end of the month, so it's like a week of the learning process is going to happen. And then after evaluation, we may see if we have to continue.
Right.
So those taking home bags, the student have to return that one when we decide and we open the school back again, or are they going to return those bags,
We don't.
and material to the teachers?
I think the idea behind the materials is that students and families could keep them. Ruth's was awesome and opened up and donated, I know, to many of our schools, got resources there.
Okay.
The student work is something that we would have a process for collecting, and that's not fully fleshed out because partially we're trying to understand how long it will be until we could collect the paper-based work specifically.
Okay.
And then there'll be a policy and protocol for collecting the technology for people who take home devices, or if we're able to get the hotspots as well.
Yeah. So what I'm asking is about the grades and or the credit, and how it's going to impact our graduation process, because we have the student 12 grades. We have to graduate in June. So
Those are all things that we're going to need to figure out.
okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Can I have one final question before we move on? I know that we're taking a lot of time. The way that we're doing the attendance with the percentages, is that, could you just remind me and clarify for me, is that just the way that Portland is doing it, or is that part of the DOE's recommendation?
That's just our.
That's just ours.
Our-
Okay, so it's not like every
our-
other district across the state is doing something similar?
That's right.
Okay.
Correct. But I would also just want to mention that the districts across Maine have been doing a ton of sharing and collaboration through the Maine Curriculum Leaders Association, and in addition to the superintendent. So we've looked at a lot of those plans in the development of what we've done. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Unless there's other questions, I think we're ready for the next section.
Great. Okay, so we're going to transition to talk a little bit of our continuity of care. So some of those other things beyond the teaching and learning that we are charged with doing. And so first and foremost, I want to highlight the tremendous amount of work that has gone into getting ourselves ready to be able to provide meals to all of our students. We have had support, obviously, all the way from the federal level, where there's been significant flexibility offered to the states. The state of Maine was extremely proactive in requesting that flexibility, the waiver, early on. So when this became a possibility to be able to have the ability to switch over into our summer feeding mode. And so I want to just make sure that we talk about the fact that both at the federal level and at the state level, there's been a tremendous amount of teamwork to get us to this place. As you know, when we closed school, when we decided to close school on over the weekend, I can't remember now if it was Saturday or Sunday, but the day that we had not yet been approved to provide food through our summer feeding sites. And so we quickly rallied to try to figure out what do we do in those couple of days before we actually have the ability to get ourselves fully ready to go. And so, you know, this is a great example of what an amazing community Portland is. It took one phone call to Full Plates, Full Potential for them to be able to, in a matter of hours, mobilize 10 restaurants in Portland that each committed to supporting, to being able to provide breakfast and lunch for our students. They couldn't get themselves to be able to do it on Monday, but to be able to do it by Tuesday. And so today we were able to have, you know, thousands of meals that were prepared in our Portland restaurants by their staff and delivered to our schools and then distributed to students as part of our first day of feeding. So I just want to recognize and thank Justin Alfond, the Full Plates, Full Potential team, and the 10 restaurants that rallied to help make today possible. And then, as I mentioned, that was, and I failed to mention that I'm just so incredibly amazed at how our teachers were the ones that just, kept coming back to us and say, we've got to do something about those 2 days. It's not okay to have the kids not have 2 days of meals. And so that's why drove us to try to find a solution for Monday and Tuesday. Our food service team has been amazing. Jane McLucas with all of her staff getting ready for this. Jane was ready to go on Friday. She filed the application. That was the first day that it was eligible that we were eligible to get it submitted, and we did. We heard over the weekend that we were approved, and so we knew that we could go. At the time, we were thinking of East End, Moore, Deering, and King and Riverton as the sites. And then again, as we heard from our staff and we heard from principals and teachers, we quickly rallied and submitted also for Presumpscot and Rowe and Peaks so that they would also be sites. The reason we had gone with the original ones is those are sites that were our summer feeding sites. And so we knew that we had, we had coverage in the city with those. Then as we started started looking at it and people started talking to us, we added Presumpscot, Rowe, and Peaks to the list. Those were approved this afternoon at 4:30, so I'm, happy to say that we're ready to go, and tomorrow we will be distributing food at all 8 of these sites across the city. The way that it's designed to work is that it will be both breakfast and lunch, so it's, from 10 to 12 every day. So tomorrow's lunch and the following day's breakfast, so that people have those, picking up both of those at the same time. I do want to point out that this is additional flexibility that the federal government and then the state have offered, because during the summer, those are 2 separate meals, and you can't get the 2 of them at the same time. So that's a wonderful addition, because it means that people only have to come one time to be able to get the meals. It's drive-up or walk-up service, so however people arrive, but again, we will have a system for handing out with minimal contact the meals to people that come. One of the limitations of the federal school nutrition program is that it is only for teens and children, so we can't feed families through that, so that's other agencies that can do that, but we can provide that to any child who is present. So it does require, unfortunately, for families to come with all of the children for us to be able to feed them. And there's no identification, so this is for free and reduced lunch eligible, but also for anybody who has to access a meal, they can do that. They don't have to be enrolled in the Portland Public Schools. They don't actually have to be a Portland resident for that. Anybody who comes who is a child or a teen we will give them breakfast and lunch. I forgot to put that in the slide, but we also are working with our community partners. So in our communication about food that went out last night and the one that's going with just the food information on it, we also are featuring, for example, the fact that Boys and Girls Club has a dinner service that they're providing. So again, at any of their 5 sites, so in Portland, there's 3 there's one at the club right across from Portland High School, and then there's one in Sagamore Village and one in Riverton Park, and at all 3 of the sites, families can get a snack and dinner. So for many of our students, that will be able to complete the day. So that's just a great example of all of the ways in which other community organizations are collaborating to make sure that we have that continuity of care for our families. We also have, through the Portland Public, the Foundation for Portland Public Schools, we have always, not always, but for the last couple of years, have had the Food Fund, which was there primarily to offset any student debt, lunchroom debt that was accrued. And so we have been promoting this heavily in the last couple of days, and we have almost $3,000 in donations that people have made towards the fund, which is something that we can again use to figure out how to support things like sites where we're providing food that are not approved and things along those lines. And then we have had a Families in Crisis Fund that has not been a publicly funded one, so we've never actually asked for donations for that. It's something that we've had foundation support to have, and that's something that we use particularly through our communities, through our social workers, through our multilingual, multicultural center to support families that are going through a specific crisis. And so we've now opened that up to donations. We created a special fund within the foundation and opened that up for donations today. So for many people, you're seeing this for the first time it's actually a drop-down. So when this PowerPoint is posted, you'll be able to click through that and it will take you directly to the link on the foundation's webpage for that purpose. And then the last thing around continuity of care is, our commitment to providing updated information to our families. We've been communicating regularly via robocalls and letters that have been going out. All of those are kept on our webpage, so there's a central place where people can access all of the communication that we have been sending out, and we will continue to do that. We also, if you've gone to our webpage recently, have seen that we have a pop-up banner right off the top that says that we're closed, and that takes you, there's a link associated with that banner that takes you to where all of our closure information and the COVID-19 information is all in that one spot. And so we want to continue to be able to do that. We're hoping to get to a regular schedule where we're communicating with families every other day about these are the new developments and things along those lines. So that's our goal with communication.
Ms. Bondo?
We'll
yeah.
pause here for questions on the continuity of care, and then we'll move to continuity of compensation.
Yes, Superintendent. Just something come out to my mind when you talk about communication with families, and I get a lot of feedback because we put in our website, and I think we have some translation done also, but it's a lot of overwhelming information to take there, and I think just an idea, because I know then we're going to give some bags, those take-home bags. Is there any way we can add some of those documents? Those documents translate to those bags so those parents can have that one in hands and be able to read, because some of them, they cannot go to our website and be able to access those documents. I think we can use the opportunity to try to have those parents and have those documents.
Yeah,
Reach out.
I asked Grace to join the Zoom, so I see that she's there. So Grace, can you answer that?
So regarding Ms. Bondo's question, we could certainly make copies of whatever it is that we have done translating, but that will be tomorrow, and we'll have to rush and make copies of those communication to families, so we have to figure out the best way to distribute them.
Sorry, I was trying to be loud. One thought I think you were saying is just at the very least have that one pager. Were you saying with the different languages and how to reach out to multilingual?
Yes, plus we have those take-home bags, then we're going
Yeah.
to parents. And I think if we can put those translate documents to those, adding to those material, I think it's going to be a reach out to the parent easily, then, to have those parents. Oh, she's talking the same time.
No, it's just repeating back, Javier, if you can mute your, it's what she said before.
Grace, can you mute yourself, please?
One thought I think you were saying is
You're playing back. There you go. So, one idea, okay, just me, is that there's been an incredible amount of work put into the packet, getting that all ready. It's possible that we could do just a stack of copies of that one pager and put a sign that says, phone number for multilingual or something like that. And that could be an easy thing. Some schools have done that. Like I know Riverton was already aware, like students aren't going to know their passwords to all the programs. So they did already stuff some of that information in their packets. But in the case where they didn't, we could put
like
the
an index,
one-pager out.
Something then if they can reach out those numbers, phone numbers, and at least to know exactly what's happening, instead for them to go to the website and to try to do that, because it's
And
gonna be
I don't want you walking away thinking that we're not communicating with our multilingual families. I have to stress that the MLMC staff are following up individually with those families, that they know who they are and they are following up with them. So, I 100% agree that we should do everything that we can to communicate with them, but I do think that we're doing a lot to communicate with them. them through Grace's staff. So I just don't want it to sort of to be out there that this is the first time that people are going to find out about things. They may not be able to access it on the website, but we are following up after those messages. You know, my robocalls are being translated, and then they're actually following up to call. I mean, Grace tells the story that lots of families don't even, you know, bother to read the letter. They'll just call the community coordinator that they work with because they have that relationship.
Okay. I do recognize that. It's nothing that I want to give on the top of the work that is already done, well done, and just to make sure that, you know, we reach out the best and we can. So thank you.
Yeah.
I have just a couple of quick questions, just for me to understand. For the breakfast and lunch bags, so are we giving breakfast and lunch in one bag in one pickup, or do people have to come in twice, one for breakfast, one for lunch?
No, it's one pickup, 2 bags.
Okay, I figured. Any work or any discussions about partnering with some of those other community organizations that do meals for adults, so that maybe we can try to do a one-stop kind of drop-off for both kids and families?
That's a great idea, and we are, it's down the road, but yes, we need to do that. As you can see here, that some of our schools partner with the Locker Project. They have supplies that they normally give to families. I know some schools are going to have bags, and they're going to contact families and say, come in, pick up the Food Locker bags with supplies for the week and stuff like that. So that's happening already, and yes, we can work with organizations that are doing sort of large-scale access to food and try to do that at the same time.
Okay. And last question on this, and I'm sorry if I missed it. Is this only Monday through Friday, not on the weekends?
That's correct.
Okay. Same thing, community partners, if anyone can help. I'm sure there's people out there eager to help out, and there's a way to leverage that. I'm confident that someone in the community is willing to step up. Mr. Burke?
Former social worker, and so you'll notice that thread into my questions. I'm wondering how we're monitoring for home safety during these times with less contact with students.
I mean, we talked a little bit about the intent to continue to have our social workers contacting families that they have on their caseload. So I think that I feel confident about that part of our work. I don't know beyond that there is much that we can do other than, if there's something that would become apparent by either, lack of attendance, lack of responsiveness, or anything that we saw in students when they came and were visible to us. But that is clearly one of the challenges about, not having contact with our students on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, thanks. I think I just needed to hear that. And then for on the list for down the road, if this goes beyond 2 weeks, is it on your list to figure out how we can harness the energy of all the people that are asking, how can I help within the social distancing protocols and such?
Yes.
Short answer, yeah? Okay,
Yes.
thanks.
And I want to just say that, we've harnessed a lot of that already. And so there's obviously more, and there's more that we can do. And as those things become readily apparent, we will be doing more of that.
Thank you. I think we're ready now for the compensation.
So next, I'm going to turn it over to Barb Stoddard to talk about the last part of this, which is, what we're trying to do around continuity of compensation for our staff.
Good evening. So as everybody's already said, these are definitely unprecedented times. Over the last 6 days, I've been simply blown away by the level of commitment, care, and compassion that I've experienced at every level of this organization. Staff are approaching this crisis with their hearts as well as their minds. We appreciate the level of collaboration and flexibility that all staff, along with the leaders of our unions, have exhibited. It's made an otherwise really grueling time bearable. So tonight I want to share a few staffing updates about the closure with you. So first, the district is committed to continuity of compensation for all of our employees for their regularly scheduled hours, and we are expecting them to be available to work as outlined in our staff work expectations document, which is in your board docs. Most staff will work remotely, while some will be asked to work staggered schedules or in alternating shifts based on the need for social distancing, while maintaining a basic level of food security for our community and a basic level of district operations. For our hourly staff, we will share a communication about timesheets no later than Thursday. Our payroll deadlines will remain the same. However, we recognize that there are challenges that could arise that might prevent timely submissions for some individuals. Therefore, we plan to pay all of our hourly employees their regularly scheduled hours with the timesheet verification process that will happen after the fact. With regard to our temporary employees, we will fulfill our employment commitment to anyone who is in a long-term assignment, including long-term teacher substitutes and long-term ed techs. We may also call on our daily substitutes on an as-needed basis to provide support when regular staff are sick or can't otherwise work. We understand that there may be a subset of employees who have a reasonable basis for wanting to avoid contact with others and therefore will not come to work. These requests will be honored and assessed by HR on a case-by-case basis. Any regular employee who is absent from work due to unnecessary self-quarantine or due to illness related to COVID-19 will be granted up to 10 workdays of sick leave from a district emergency sick bank, regardless of whether they have accrued leave time available or not. Our staff, like our students, are a resilient bunch. I know that we will all continue to work together to support each other, to continue student learning, and to maintain district operations during this challenging time while keeping the health, safety of our staff, their families, and our school community at the forefront. Now more than ever, I'm honored to be an employee of Portland Public Schools.
Any questions?
Thank you so much, Barb. On the up to 10 days of paid sick leave from the central bank, is that what you call it again? Yeah.
It's an emergency bank.
Emergency bank, thank you. If a staff member is sick, so first, and I think you might have said this, but if a staff member has a sick dependent, can they use that leave for?
So to differentiate, if people are ill themselves or need to stay home for other reasons, they can access any of their district benefit leave, vacation, sick time, without questions asked. We're not going to ask people to produce anything. Specific to COVID-19, there are 10 days available for people with illness related to that or under a quarantine situation that they would have access to that.
So if a staff member is taking care of a family member who is sick with COVID-19, they would use, sorry, not to be clear in my question, they would use vacation and sick leave outside of the emergency bank.
If it's COVID-19 or related,
Okay.
it's the 10
So
days.
it's if
in the
they're
emergency
sick
bank.
or if a family member is sick who they're taking care of.
Yep.
And I know we're not there yet, but if we get to a place where we're seeing staff being sick and also taking care of family, and that's extending beyond the 10 days, would we reevaluate what if any, how we can help those staff members? Yes. Thank you.
Mr. Burke?
I just want to say thank you. The security of knowing that you're still going to get paid during these times is fundamental to emotional and mental health. And hearing since the beginning in your report this evening of how you're trying to find every way possible to do that for our folks, it really matters to me. Thank you.
I'll just echo that, Barb. Specifically, I've heard that you have been incredible attending to or answering some of these questions and raising these the concerns that have been raised. So just thank you again. Can't say that enough for everybody in the team, but specifically when it comes to our teachers and our staff and making sure that we don't add to the stress and to the anxiety that the situation has. Can't say enough. About what a difference that makes and how that's a critical part to what we're asking them to do. So thank you so much, really. Anybody else? All right. Thank you.
All right. Last but not least, I just wanted to, again, make it visible to you that there are some extraordinary costs that we are taking on as part of this, and this is just a sort of thrown together list of the kinds of things that we are needing to purchase or considering purchasing that would be additional costs. At a later date, once we have a real sense of what that is, there may be a chance that we will need to access the contingency fund to do this. We obviously are keeping track of everything so that we can seek any additional federal funding or emergency reimbursement funds that might be made available either at the state or federal level. But those are the kinds of things that just to sort of give you an idea of what are the kinds of things that are sort of in our sights as we approach this work. Everything from, devices and supplemental peripherals to those devices, to subscriptions to some of the platforms, costs of the printing that we just did to make sure that everybody had the materials ready to go on the tomorrow, and staff asking questions about cell phone charges as we're asking them to use their personal phones to do these kinds, to be in contact with families and things along those lines. Medical reimbursement, medical equipment that our nurses need to be able to do their work, things along those lines are the kinds of things that are potential costs coming up. So I just wanted to make sure that you understood that and knew that where this is, where some of these things are going.
Ms. Vigno?
Are there additional food service costs, or is that unknown at this point?
It's unknown at this point. One of the originally, we thought that we would need to pay, for example, for the food on peaks because it doesn't qualify. It sounds like it's going to qualify, so we wouldn't need to pay for that as a separate cost. So we don't know yet, but that could potentially still be something.
And then my apologies if this comes across as somewhat crass, but are there potential savings that might offset these costs, or we're going to be, and clearly most of our costs are staff costs, and I very much value the principles that Barb just laid out. But what we'd be looking at is, this set of increased costs that we'll have to grapple with at some point later in the year.
It's hard to say exactly what those might be. Potentially some facilities costs that for as we move to be fully remote next week. That our buildings won't, have the same level of heating and electrical needs as they currently do, so those could potentially be savings. To the extent that we are not, that our folks are healthy and doing their work remotely, we could potentially see some savings in substitute costs, but those could actually, be much higher somewhere down the road. So it's kind of hard to, tell. So we don't have any sort of clear areas where we think we're going to have savings. It's a good thought.
Cool. Ms. Bondo and then Mr. Burke.
Yeah, just get back. Then, if I remember, Maria, you just mentioned about using some of the students from adult education to help with the language. So I want to see if it's going to be a cost associated with that, or we're going to use them as a volunteer, because I know the multilingual is really short on the parent specialist. I mean, we really need a lot of those help on that side. So is a cost associated with that, or they're going to be working as
So to the extent that it's employees that are at the, at Portland Adult Ed that are in the office that won't be doing anything in the office, those are some of the staff, and then the others would be volunteers. If we were, taking people that are at Portland Adult Ed and that could come and help to do some of the interpretation, that would be on a volunteer basis.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mr. Burke?
Just one thing to add to this list that I'm learning as all my meetings are going remote and virtual is the difference that a mic or a headset makes. And if our teachers are doing a lot of virtual instruction, that might become a very helpful tool.
So that would be under the device chargers and other tech supplies, but that's a great example of the kinds of things that we will potentially be having to spend money on.
Ms. Vigdor?
I had a question from earlier on, not related to potential costs. Is that okay?
Yeah.
I think I saw two different numbers for the tech hotline, so I was just wondering if there are actually two different numbers, or if you can clarify what the number is.
It is the...
And the places where I saw them, Javier, when you talked about, when in your opening comments, you stated a different number than that was in the documentation in board docs.
Yeah, and I think the one that I stated, the one 207-874-8159, that was the updated one that I got from Grace just before the meeting. I think that the one that might be in board docs was the one that they tested and found out wasn't working, and so Grace sent me this number. So this is the correct one, and we will go back and revise the document and update that to board docs as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Good catch. Thank you.
Yes, Ms. Bondo.
Can I go back? Because I missed something with the brief program and the student. I tried to understand how it's going to work, because we are so equipped with the BRAVE program and special ed. And when I look at then the parents has to be substitute for that. So I just want to see what kind of support we have. And also those are special ed students, are they going to be able to get their lunch if they need to, because of the accessibility for the transportation as well. So just an idea if what's going to happen. Thank you.
Christy, did you hear the question? She was asking about a little bit, just wanting a little bit more detail about what's envisioned for students in the BREATHE program. Can you speak a little bit more to that in terms of what you know so far? I know that there's still questions for the long term.
Can you say that part?
Just speak to a little bit more detail about the BREATHE program as far as what you know right now, understanding that we're still thinking about longer term plans and implications.
Yeah, so we've contacted all the parents, and they're doing well and have lots of questions. So we're just doing the best that we can to communicate with them. We're in contact with them daily. And so they are coming to sites tomorrow to pick up laptops and packets and all that stuff. So they're right on board with communication and to know everything that's going on. We're also sending out lots of behavior tracking stuff, how parents can modify behaviors at home, and so and lots of help with that.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
And I just want to acknowledge what we said earlier with students receiving special education supports. In the case of a student who has a high degree of one-to-one support, for example, those are the cases where we're, thinking through in this allowable, flexible 10 days, learning more from Drummond and the state about how does that look and what might that look like long-term. And so I'm just acknowledging that there are certain kind of cases like that, even within the Breathe program, that are still to be sorted out.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Ms. Victor?
One last question, I promise. I'm just wondering how much communication there is among principals and administrators here in Maine and beyond, the superintendent mentioned learning from, I think, some of our European counterparts, and so I'm just wondering if that has been fruitful so far, and if you see continued opportunities as we're transitioning to remote learning, figuring out, learning from what other districts clearly were, different than most districts in Maine or all districts in Maine, but just wanting to hear about the collaboration that is or isn't happening.
Yeah, I mean, as Malia mentioned, and I think I also mentioned in my opening comments, that we have a strong network here in Maine of districts that are working on the same kinds of issues with the school closures. A lot of what you saw in the continuity of instruction plan is modeled after other work that's happening here and so on. We, individually each have, our own networks of peers that we work with in other districts and outside of Maine. And so I've been in contact with, friends and colleagues across the country around what they're doing in different situations. So obviously reading a lot. We're getting a ton of emails. Everybody that is, in different virtual spaces in terms of companies that provide service in those areas is emailing and offering their support and services and things along those lines. So we are, staying in tune with all of those things, and at the same time trying to, focus on getting through this first week. I don't know, Malia, if you have anything you want to add.
I mean, it would probably be to make similar points. I think there are citations in our professional learning plan to some of the districts that we collaborated with or learned from most directly on this. And then, like I mentioned before, the curriculum leaders across the state are sharing plans and Google Drives and documents. I mean, I think that it's overwhelming how much sharing is going on, and so there's a point at which it hasn't felt entirely helpful to keep reading every district's plan in the state. I'm sure they're great, but so we're just trying to manage that. I will say that the superintendent mentioned Molly Myers. She's new to the team through the Barr Foundation work as the academic supports and transitions coordinator, and so we did task her on, I believe, day 2 of her employment with us, with being the project manager for our crisis management team. She's done a phenomenal job. She's worked around the clock through the evenings and weekends alongside us on the team. And so it's been fantastic to have her because, she's sort of, she said I can stop saying FYI in my emails and just forward things to her. So we have some structure in place for people to process and call through SEL stuff to Chris, academic stuff to Jesse, and that sort of thing. So lots of sharing happening.
And the Cumberland County Superintendents are meeting 3 times a week, so we have a standing Zoom meeting that we're doing, and we started those last week and are continuing to do that. Did that, obviously through the weekend as well. So we have a really strong collaborative relationship with our neighboring superintendents. So that's been productive. Again, a great opportunity to just hear what people are concerned about, and that's, sort of some of the things that we put on the radar for down the road are things that have come out of those conversations.
So if we're done with your presentation, we'll move on to our action item.
Thank you to the folks on Zoom. I think you can go and get some rest. I know it's been a long day.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Actually, there's one last thing I wanted to acknowledge. I was going back in the district COVID-19 where we have all this communication that's gone out. I scrolled all the way to the bottom. The district has been sending the communication out since February about this. So I know that the last 72 or so hours is where everything feels like it's been ramped up. But just want to acknowledge again, like weeks have been. This work has taken several weeks leading to this. So, it's again just we'll move on to the action item. Sorry. Consideration and action to approve Consideration and action to approve the plan for continuity of education during the COVID-19 related school closure. Is there a motion? Mr. Balfan, second by Mr. Burke. Superintendent, do you want to speak any more on the motion?
I don't.
Are there any questions on the motion? Just to double check that the PowerPoint presentation is going to be uploaded to Word docs. I know everything else already is. I just checked. And that's it. There is no public presence, so we don't have public comment opportunities at this time. Any board discussion?
Comment?
Pardon me?
I have a comment.
Yeah. Ms. Bondo.
Yeah. Just want to say thank you. And I think it takes a leadership to be able to pull this kind of really short time and try to work on the equity and make sure that all our students can be access of some other learning opportunity about this really difficult time. And I really want to recognize the team effort and your leadership because it's not easy. It's so critical. We have our personal life as well, but coming and have the values, then we are standing, all of us today, and it's really something that we need to appreciate. And I'm really coming from bottom of my heart, and I really say thank you.
And on behalf of our team, thank you for recognizing that. It has been, an incredibly arduous effort that, I said that during my opening remarks that, we really started even though we have been communicating about this for, close to a month, that we started the work of really trying to pull this plan together in the last, a week from yesterday. So it's been a tremendous amount of work, and I can't say enough about, the team that I mentioned in my remarks, Malia and her academic team. Their ability to bring people together and to pull that, to understand what's best practice, to then pull it into a coherent document is just a sign of, we talk about this all the time in sort of in these esoteric terms about, having district level capacity. If we didn't have district level capacity, Malia and her team, we wouldn't be having this conversation. So I think that's a great example of why we talk about having capacity, because this is the work that we do every day, and they're not doing their everyday work because they're doing this work, and it's it's been a lot, and people have been going above and beyond. But thank you for recognizing that.
Any other board discussion, Mr. Burke?
Just briefly, we'll say thank you again. And in addition to being here and voting tonight to make sure this all continue. If there's other ways we can be helpful other than not being generous with our ideas and our emails.
I meant that in the, I meant that in the, absolutely.
It's shared with love. It's said with love. Please do know, at least speaking for myself, that I'm here to be activated when you're ready for it.
Thank you.
Ms. Bigdell?
I just second what Mickey said. I won't be able to say it as well, so just from the bottom of my heart, thank you for all this work and leadership.
Any other board discussion? Not, I won't stress it enough. Thank you. The superintendent is the sole employee of the board, so I'll direct my comments directly to him. I appreciate our partnership in this work. I appreciate the countless hours that you put into this, and I appreciate the way that you value keeping the board informed and that you know that we're all in this together. As Mr. Burke said, anything else that we can do to support, we're here for it.
Appreciate it.
Also, having said that, all those in favor of approving the plan for continuity of education during COVID-19 related school closures, please indicate. And that's unanimous.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Is there a motion to adjourn the business meeting? Mr. Burke, second by Ms. Figdor. All those in favor, please indicate. It's unanimous. We've adjourned at 7:58 p.m.